The Last Fruit by James Huntley. Chapter 1. Dappled sunlight streamed through the canopy above, kissing the earth around Emma's tanned, bare feet. She had been walking all morning, just as she always did, searching for fruit. The wicker basket on her back held 4 so far. Only 2 more and they'd be set for the day. A light breeze stirred the leaves, carrying the distant, familiar chorus of birdsong, a constant companion on her daily gathering. Emma spotted Chris far across the dry, open grass, stooping to pick something up before slinging it in his basket over his shoulder. "Lucky," she murmured, walking on. She hesitated, glancing between the well-trodden perimeter of the towering trunk in the distance. Should she stick to the safe route, or risk moving a little closer? She was eager to be done, and if someone shot her a look, so be it. She walked briskly for an hour, the empty land gradually giving way to scattered cottages and small holdings. And then, just ahead, a fallen piece of fruit, untouched. Emma's heart skipped as she jogged over, unslinging her pack with practiced ease. She tucked the fruit inside, smiling. 1 more to go. She followed the patchy track, passing small dwellings with root cellars nestled beside them. Their family house had never needed one. They'd never gathered enough fruit to store. Must be nice, she thought. Psst! Emma started at the voice, peeking around the corner to find Will grinning at her. "Come to pilfer our fruit, eh?" He gave her a playful shove. "What if I have? Well, looks like you've got plenty." She nodded towards his brimming basket. "The great tree provides. Finders keepers," he winked. "Though, I suppose I could spare 1 or 2. How many are you out?" He was good-looking, well-fed, and strong. That perfect mix of hard work and the muscle to show for it. Tawny blonde, sun-bleached and tanned. Not stringy like her. "Just 1, she shrugged. He tossed her a fruit without hesitation. "There, done for the day." She caught it, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I'll walk you back." He took her arm, leading her down the track towards home. They walked in easy silence, birdsong of the great tree weaving through their conversation. Sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything. "You've been heading my way more and more this year," Will teased. "Are you sure it's just about the fruit?" She wished he was right. "Last year was the same, you just didn't notice," she shrugged. "More and more people are moving trunkward. We're just not finding enough in the outer branches anymore." It was simple. If things kept going this way, they wouldn't be able to stay out there much longer. "They say over by the trunk you can help pick and take back the leftovers. I hear they have heaps and heaps." Will's voice held a wistful note. "It doesn't seem fair. How come they get to keep it all?" Emma's brows knitted together. "They don't. They give some out. Besides, they got there first. That's just how it is." Will shrugged, as if that settled it. But it had never felt right to her. They walked in silence for a minute. She almost let it go. Almost. But the thought boiled up inside her, too big to swallow. "You can't even eat a big pile of fruit. It's just sitting there. You only need a couple a day and—" She would have kept going, but Will laughed, throwing a heavy arm around her shoulder. Em. It's too nice a day to get bent out of shape over the trunkies," he grinned. "We get by. The tree provides. Relax, enjoy the walk." And damn it, he wasn't wrong. It was a lovely day. Sunlight dappled the path. The air smelled sweet. The breeze played through her hair. Those trunkies didn't get to enjoy the sun like the outer branches did. "Next, you'll be telling me about the machine, huh?" he teased. "Please, as if," she scoffed. "I'm not that dumb." "You don't believe there's something out there?" His voice was playful, but underneath, just a grain of something else. Hope? No, not that positive. I don't know, maybe, but not some machine that makes fruit. She shook her head. Fruit grows, Will, on trees. Machines don't make fruit. Her tone came out sharper than she meant it. Will didn't reply. They walked in silence for a while, the branches above thinning as more sunlight broke through the canopy. Emma could feel Will winding up to ask something, the tension curling in his posture. Before he could work up to it, she turned and smiled. "This is good. Maybe I'll look around here a little." "Oh, yeah, sounds good." He hesitated, and then, "Listen, few of us get together trunkwood and share what we have. It's a bit of a walk. Well, a lot of a walk for you, but I bet you get finished faster." He smiled, and she could tell he was trying to help. "Maybe." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, nodding, just enough to let him drop it. "If things keep going the way they are." He got the hint. "All right, I hear you." Will smiled kindly, maybe even a little sadly, then tossed up a wave as he turned to head home. Emma let out a breath, relieved. Almost without thinking, she glanced over her shoulder to make sure he wasn't turning back. Just in case, she bent to pretend search, letting her hands skim over the undergrowth, giving herself a reason to linger. When she was satisfied he was really gone, she straightened, rolling her shoulders loose and starting towards home. Chris was still searching nearby. He caught her eye and threw her a wave, which she returned. He was wiry like her, freckled with a mass of thick, curly red hair. "Keep at it," she called over. Chris laughed. "What else can I do?" He turned and kept walking. It was past noon now. They should have been done for the day. Chapter 2. Will held up his hand and she slapped it. "All right, Em, this is Pete and Claire," he grinned, nodding to the two beside him. Pete was shorter, but just as built as Will. His dark brown hair tousled, his features soft. He gave a small wave of acknowledgement. She already knew Claire. She used to be an outer brancher like Emma. Used to be. She'd filled out a little. Her belly was now unmistakably swollen with child. Pete threw an arm around her protectively. Emma smiled, a polite, practical thing. "All right, let's get to it." Her eyes lingered on Claire, drawn to the unspoken story of how she'd gotten here, and to the one Emma felt Will nudging her towards. She pushed it away. There was work to be done. She couldn't believe how quickly the basket filled. Morning had barely gotten started before they were meeting back up, topping off Claire's haul like it was nothing. "Same time tomorrow?" Will asked, looking straight at her. She had no recourse. "Same time tomorrow." Felt like a concession. She didn't wait to be walked back home. She could feel Will's eyes on her back as she told herself, "Don't look back." Chris was in his usual spot, and, despite herself, her legs carried her towards him. He straightened, greeting her as she approached. "By the leaves, done just like that, eh? Trunky life." He eyed her brimming basket. "Trunky life," she admitted. She held it out. "Take a couple, I don't need all of this." And he did. "Don't mind if I do." He took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. She joined him, sitting beside him, and looking up through the thinning branches. "You gonna be his?" Chris asked bluntly. She liked that about him. "I'm not nobody's." She bit into the tender skin, the sweet, familiar taste filling her mouth. Chris nodded, swallowing. I get it, though." "What about you? Getting tired of all this?" She side-eyed him. "Gonna head trunkwood anytime soon?" "I got other plans." Something in his tone made her pause. She shifted to face him. "What do you mean, other plans?" But she already knew. Other plans is all. His voice went tight, defensive. The machine? Don't even, Chris. A beat of silence. Then, I seen it. Another beat of silence. She relaxed. No, you ain't. She took another bite, but it wasn't as sweet. Well, I seen it smoke leastways. Chris shot her a look, chewing slow. You seen smoke, Chris. She rolled her eyes. You wouldn't understand, he smiled. Not a Chris smile. What do you mean I wouldn't understand? She raised an eyebrow. You's Trunkwoods now. His voice was different, and you's just a girl. He stood, tossing his pit aside. I gotta get back to looking, okay? Emma didn't say anything, couldn't say anything. She'd never heard Chris talk like that before. She wasn't even sure what it meant, or what her being a girl had to do with anything. Her body didn't know whether to cry or steam. Heat prickled under her skin, her pulse hammering, the fruit sitting sick and heavy in her stomach. She forced herself to relax, breathe. She let it all settle, waiting for the wave to pass, and then numbness. It washed over her, dulling the edges as she tipped her head back, eyes tracing the familiar weave of leaves and branches above. Same time tomorrow, she admitted. Chapter 3. Pete and Claire walked hand in hand, little Alfie slung tight against Pete's chest. They'd had to move Trunkwoods a little. Couldn't risk getting too spaced out, not when running into another group might mean an argument. Despite it all, Emma was glad to have Will around for that. People took one look at him and decided maybe a fight wasn't worth it. She missed the house, sure, but it was nice here too, with Will. Different nice. There was stuff, people to talk to, games to play, a kind of life she hadn't had before. And she could still walk out to the branches even if there was nothing out there anymore. Will didn't like it, said it was Sheeny land now. And it was. But she'd never had any problems. She knew the way, and for the most part, they knew her. Anyway, the baskets were full, just like always, and the great tree was bigger than ever. That had to mean something. She was sure fruit would start growing on the outer branches again soon. It had to. She heard shouting. The four of them started towards Will. Pete unslung Alfie and handed him off, jogging ahead. Emma stayed back with Claire. Neither of them spoke. The argument came into view, voices sharp and heated. She recognized one of them. Chris. He was in Will's face. What's the matter, Trunky? Chris spat beside him. This is free land, ain't it? Keep moving, Sheeny. Will stood his ground. Chris paced in front of him, restless, wired. She wasn't sure if Will could scrap, but it didn't matter. Chris wouldn't actually do anything. Your day's coming, Trunky. Chris pointed a finger, jabbing it right into Will's forehead. When the machine gets here, you'll see. Will swatted his hand away, but still didn't make a move. Chris just smiled. He slung his pack over his shoulder and turned back towards his own group. You should have laid him out, man. Pete's voice was low, but charged. Will scowled. Didn't see you making any moves. He shot Pete a look, daring him to push it further. Come on, Claire, we're done for the day. Pete slung an arm around her, already leading her away. Claire met Emma's eyes, wordless. Then she turned, disappearing with Pete. Come on, Will muttered, bending down slightly. His voice was lower now. If they're going, I don't want to stay out here. She nodded. They walked in silence, away from the distant shouting, back towards the quiet of home. But today, she didn't want to stop. Come with me to the branches, she pleaded. Will paused. Then he smiled. Yeah, that sounds nice. She smiled back, already looking forward to it. They talked and laughed as they left it all behind, sunlight warming their skin, the tension melted away. She was already feeling better. She led him to one of her favorite spots, a little clearing along a quiet track where a big, sun-warmed rock waited like an old friend. They sat together, sharing fruit, letting the moment stretch. "What's that?" Will stood, shading his eyes with his palm. She followed his gaze to the horizon, and her breath caught a plume of smoke. A single, dark mark against the sky, like an exclamation where the land met the air. Fear gripped her. It's just smoke," she stuttered, but she didn't believe herself. "Yeah, but there's something there too." Will squinted, stepping forward. She grabbed his arm. "I want to go." She pulled him back. "Yeah, of course." He turned to her. "Let's go back." Chapter 4. Claire turned to her, adjusting Alfie where he nestled against her chest. "Will's been different lately." She spoke quietly, almost a whisper. "Pete too." Emma felt her stomach sink, because she knew it was true. "There were a few nights where he left," Claire murmured. I think he was going to a Sheeny meeting." "Yes." That was all Emma needed to say. Claire swallowed. Her voice grew even smaller. "He wants me to go see it with him." She stopped, clutching Alfie close. "The machine." "What will you do?" Emma asked. Claire exhaled. "What can I do? We have a child together. I have to go." Emma nodded, her brows knitting together. Claire turned to her, gripping her hands tight. "Will you come with us?" Emma saw the shine in Claire's eyes, but it wasn't hope. She gently pried her hands free. "I can't. I'm going trunkward." "Machines don't make fruit, Claire." Claire hung her head. "I guess I'll see for myself." She stopped and watched as Emma walked away, trunkward. Emma allowed herself to look back, just once. "The tree provides," she laughed. It didn't. Not anymore. But she said the old words anyway. She joined a trickle of people moving in the same direction. The trickle became a stream, then a river. She knew where they were all going. To the companies. The line moved steadily towards the fence that marked the outer boundary. When she reached the front, she set her basket aside. A company-branded one was placed in her hands. The man ahead of her smiled. "First time?" She nodded gravely. "Don't worry. There's plenty. Seriously, you'll see." He grinned, holding out a hand. "I'm Dave." She shook it. The land inside the fences wasn't like the land outside. It was hard, well-trodden. She followed Dave because she wasn't sure what else to do. The stream of people thinned. Here and there, a bruised fruit lay discarded on the ground. She almost picked one up, but no one else did, so she didn't. Before long, they were out in the open, where she saw it. A fruit, mid-drop. It'd been a long time since she'd seen that. Dave jogged forward, laughing as he caught it before it hit the ground. "Do you like it best when you catch them before they hit, if you can?" he called back to her. She nodded and craned her neck, watching the canopy above. It didn't take long before she was catching them too, moving like Dave, loading fruit into her basket with practiced ease. He helped her with the last few. "First basket's for them," he explained. "Then you get to grab your own." She swallowed and looked around. Company people stood at intervals watching. Some explained the process, some helped when needed, others just kept an eye out, making sure no fights broke out. No fighting was good, she supposed. They weren't muscular like Will. The company people were soft, plump. So was Dave. She reminded herself that she didn't have to be here. She'd come on her own. It was safe. She forced herself to relax as she handed the company's fruit, collecting her own basket in return. Gathering her personal fruit for the day, she even felt a flicker of excitement watching the canopy and waiting for a mid-drop of her own. Chapter 5. The walk back to her and Will's old place took a couple of hours. By the time she arrived, she was huffing and puffing, chest tight with effort. She wasn't walking as much as she used to. That thought sat uncomfortably in her chest. People looked at her with suspicion, not openly, but enough that she felt it. It made her skin prickle. She was an outer brancher, wasn't she? Whatever. She was doing what she had to. A low rumble rolled through the earth beneath her feet, deep and distant. She froze, but no one else reacted. Somebody nearby noticed and laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that made heat rise to her face. It passed after a moment, and she straightened, forcing herself to move. Around her, people clasped hands, talking excitedly, before breaking off into groups, all heading in the same direction. Fear prickled at the edges of her thoughts, but she pushed it aside. Maybe it wasn't fear at all. Maybe it was just the realization of how soft she was getting. She was an outer brancher, not some trunky. Squaring her shoulders, she adjusted her gait, rolling into that familiar, easy swagger. It felt forced at first, but the longer she walked, the more natural it became. She followed the others, slipping into their rhythm, determined to prove, to herself more than anyone, that she still belonged. A small crowd had gathered on the hilltop, all lined up and staring at something in the distance. She pushed through, finding a spot amongst them. It was her first time seeing the machine. It was far away still, but it was there. It was real. The people around her were smiling, cheering, waving it forward like an old friend. They wanted it to come closer. A tightness coiled in her chest. She swallowed it down and let herself be in the moment. Between here and the machine, she could see more people. Some stood near it, some even close to it. Nothing was happening to them. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A thought surfaced, unbidden, a whisper against the noise of the crowd. Machines don't make fruit. She knew it was true because how could a machine make fruit? Someone was approaching the group, a basket slung across their back, but not any basket Emma had seen before. This wasn't woven from wood or fiber. It was a net made of something hard, made of metal. The person smiled as they moved through the crowd, handing out something square. "Here you go, the fruit of the machine, and there's plenty more for each of you. The machine provides, and it's coming here. So much fruit for all of you, as much as you can eat." The crowd whooped and cheered. The man placed a square in Emma's hand, and he smiled. His skin was sallow, pale, sickly. Yet, at the same time, he seemed strong. Strong and weak in a way she couldn't explain. She looked at the square in her palm. It was kind of like fruit, but not. She lifted it to her nose. Too sweet. She licked it. The taste was pleasant at first, then bitter, but she took a bite anyway. It was good. She could see the appeal, and she swallowed the rest, forcing it down. The taste was fine, but something felt off. Her stomach churned, her head swam, and the world around her seemed unsteady, as if everything had turned soft and sloshed beneath her feet. A giggle escaped her, and she put a hand over her mouth in shock. She stepped away from the group, further and further until she was alone. The feeling only worsened, creeping up her throat, until she put her fingers to the back of her throat and forced herself to be sick. After a while, it passed. The dizziness faded, the nausea settled, and slowly she felt like herself again. She turned to leave when a familiar voice stopped her. Em? Will broke away from the group he was with, smiling as he approached. His skin had that same sallow quality as the man with the metal basket. Did you see it? She swallowed. Yeah, I saw the machine. Will laughed, his grin wide, too eager. Ain't it something? He reached into his pack. Did you get a taste of its fruit? I have some if you want more. Her stomach twisted, but she forced herself to smile. Yeah, thanks, I did. It was good, but I'm all full. His grin didn't falter. Oh, great. I've missed you, Em. Heard you went trunkwood. He nodded, eyes bright. I'm glad you came to your senses. Emma felt the words catch in her throat. Oh, yeah, I did, she lied. Damn soft trunkies, am I right? By the sheen, I hate 'em. But you're here. I'm so relieved. Emma laughed, the sound thin and nervous. Yeah, not like us, right? Will beamed. Hey, are you gonna be around later? I'm going up there. He's been up close, says he can get me there too. He leaned in slightly. Maybe you'd want to come? Emma's pulse thudded in her ears. Oh yeah, definitely, that sounds great. She held his gaze, forcing herself to maintain eye contact as she lied through her teeth. Shame curled in her stomach. She could tell he didn't quite believe her, but he didn't say so. He just nodded. All right then. Meet you here when the sun goes down? I'll be here. She forced the words out, bright and easy. Her legs shook beneath her, screaming for her to run. She took a step back, and then another. Then she turned. Tears blurred her vision as she walked, her breath tight in her chest. Whatever she did, she couldn't look back. For a moment, silence. Then, looking forward to it! Chapter 6. I don't see what we can do about it, though, Dave shrugged. If it's as big as you say, then what am I gonna do? Throw fruit at it? You branches might be better at fighting, but I've never fought anything. I have my family to think about. You don't understand. We have to do something about it. It's coming. Emma's voice rose, but he didn't flinch. Dave shook his head, still smiling. Em, come on, here? The machine won't come here. She felt like she was losing her mind. The machine was in the outer branches now. She had snuck back out alone to see it with her own eyes, and there it was, a monstrous thing, belching thick smoke into the canopy, blackening the leaves of the great tree. Its maw spun and devoured land, houses, anything in its path, and the people cheered as it did. Emma had stood frozen in horror, watching as the machine swallowed everything before it. And then, out slid its disgusting fruit, and the people had run up and eaten it until they were full and sick. Dave laughed as she spoke. It sounds a little far-fetched, if I'm being honest. Come with me, come and see. She grabbed his arm, desperation creeping into her voice. He shook his head. Leave the trunk? I can't, Em. It's too dangerous out there. She felt mad. She felt heavy all the time, like the great tree itself was pressing down on her, crushing her beneath its weight. It had grown bigger, and they had moved closer, closer than she had ever been. The fruit that dropped out wasn't good anymore. Spoiled. Useless. But the company fruit? That was different. She had wandered near it one day, just to see, just to count. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands of fruits piled high. More than she had ever seen in one place. Her blood boiled. There were people out there who needed it. People who were starving. Maybe if they had this, if they could just take a fraction of what sat here untouched, they wouldn't even want the machine in the first place. She paced back and forth, hands shaking, breath uneven. Oh, what could she do? Her fingers twitched, searching for relief. She had started pulling out her hairs, just one or two at a time, from her arms, her legs, her eyebrows. Tiny, sharp stings that did nothing to quiet the storm inside her. Her body was screaming at her to do something, to fight, to act, to run, but she didn't know how to make it stop. She didn't know how to make herself feel safe anymore. Around her, the trunkies kept collecting fruit as it fell, moving with quiet efficiency, as if nothing had changed. Emma laughed. A sharp, manic sound tore out of her throat, one she didn't recognize. How could they keep going like this? Like everything wasn't falling apart. Like they didn't see it. The tree wasn't making enough fruit. There were more people by the trunk than ever, and the piles of company fruit had never been this big. Chapter 7. The machine is coming, and the companies will work alongside it. There is no need to worry. We will help manage the machine as we have managed the great tree. The company worker's voice was smooth, practiced. There had been an announcement, a formal statement to explain the shift. Because of the fruit shortage, the company would now be taking control of their reserves, and in return, they would help manage the machine distribute its fruit to the people. Emma couldn't believe it. They had announced it right there, in front of their vast stockpile of fruit. The lie wasn't even hidden. It was staring them all in the face. Some, like her, had wailed and shouted, clutching their hair, screaming at the injustice. But most just shrugged, and then they got back to work. She did the only thing she could. She got back to work. She ate the spoiled fruit that fell to the ground, the ones no one else wanted. There was nothing left to do. They were too few. The people of the trunk were too docile. This was happening. So she planned. She schemed. She turned over every scenario in her mind, trying to find a way out. Maybe she could slip away. Maybe she could wander into the wasteland and search for another tree. Somewhere. The rumble in the ground was part of her life now. Just another thing that happened. In the distance, a gout of black smoke curled into the canopy of the great fruitless tree. Emma wept. That night she packed the fruit she had, even the disgusting machine fruit. Then, alone, she stalked out into the wilderness. At the edge of the canopy, the grass was scorched brown, crunching dry underfoot. She walked and walked. For 2 nights she pressed forward, grateful for the movement, for the simple relief of doing something instead of drowning in despair. But the land stretched empty before her. Nothing but bare, hard earth. Her fruit dwindled. Finally, with tears in her eyes, she accepted it. There was nowhere else to go. Chapter 8. Emma awoke to the great rumble of the machine. She felt nothing. After a time, she made her way toward the fence. The machine was devouring it. Company people screamed and pleaded, their voices swallowed by the grinding of metal. The barrier tore apart like it was nothing. She saw them get tangled in its slats, the bodies knocked down as the barrier fell, their hands clawing at the earth, trying to stop themselves from being dragged forward. One by one, they scrambled free, until somebody didn't. They kicked and sobbed, begged. They were pulled inch by inch towards the great, spinning maw. They pleaded with the machine, with the crowd, with anyone. There was nothing to be done. The noise never changed. Emma watched them disappear. The next day, she found a place to sit and watch. She forced down the disgusting fruit, swallowing against the nausea as the machine moved towards the trunkies standing in its path. They held signs that read, "Go away!" shaking their fists, shouting like their voices could turn it back. Dave was there, but the machine didn't stop. It crushed them in its metal teeth, grinding through flesh and bone as the crowd broke apart in fear, screaming as they ran. The company men approached next, carrying fruit in their hands. They offered it, trying to feed the machine like it was something that could be appeased. It devoured what they gave without hesitation, then turned towards their stockpiles and consumed those too. Some of the company men didn't run. They stepped forward, walking into its jaws on their own, like it had already taken something from them long before this moment. The noise never changed. Emma sat with the others, silent, as the machine finally reached the trunk. The noise changed at last. A great grinding, a deep groaning, the slow, tortured creaking of something ancient being torn apart. They watched as slowly, agonizingly slowly, the machine devoured it too. This was finally a meal worthy of the machine. She could tell it was pleased, and she wondered, would this be enough? Would it finally be sated? She wondered what they would do when the tree was gone. The machine ate, and ate, and ate, until finally, inevitably, the great tree tilted. It groaned, splitting at its base, and then, with a monstrous crash, it fell. Together, they cried. They held one another without shame, without judgment. There were no trunkies, no branchies, no. They were treeless now. The machine ate through the last of the trunk and kept going, devouring as much as it could. When the trunk was gone, it took the branches, then the leaves. For many days it consumed what remained. They picked through what was left, the fallen piles, the healthy branches. There was fruit now, enough for those who had survived. Until, finally, the machine moved on. Beyond the tree, beyond the fruit. And Emma knew, wherever it went next, there would always be more people to welcome it.